You ever wonder how corrupt the world is? Let me correct myself on that. It's not the world, how corrupt New York City is. This is how corrupt it is. Let's take the example of Anthony Scotto. He held, it says he held a political a degree from Brooklyn College. My understanding was, according to his FBI file, he dropped out of college. But he may have had, maybe he had an associate's degree. He was a good pal of Robert F. Kennedy, who was renowned as the attorney general who was determined to bust organized crime. There's two sides of that story about Bobby Kennedy and organized crime. I can tell you, believe me, I can tell you. Bear in mind now, Bobby Kennedy was also the senator from the state of New York. You need a guy like Scotto if you're going to get elected, plain and simple, from New York. He was a candidate, or he was under consideration to be a candidate for the Secretary of Labor under Jimmy Carter. There's no surprise there. Jimmy Carter. He was a labor leader. He raised $1 million for Hugh Carey, who was running for governor in 1974. 50 grand for Mario Cumo's lieutenant governor's race. Big time money in politics. His name appeared in New York City's Green Book which is a directory of city officials and muckety mucks. It gave you certain privileges. Mayor John Lindsay appointed him to the Council of Port Development and Promotion. You know, the mafia killed the port in New York. They get up and left. They've gone to Florida, Georgia, New Orleans. They're just not going to deal with the mafia skimming them every 5 minutes. So they moved. And oddly enough, here he is on the Council of Port Development. He headed the Marine Port Council for New York, which consisted of about 400 local unions. Hugh Carey put him in charge of his executive search committee. So Hugh Carey, when he was when he was mayor, he needed guys put in certain positions, and this guy would go out and find them for him. He also headed up the Economic Development Board. He lectured, Scotto we're talking about, lectured at Harvard, at the New School, which is this liberal progressive college in Manhattan. And he served as a trustee on the prestigious Brooklyn Academy of Music. It's even more prestigious now that Brooklyn has gone up in the world. Here's the other side of this guy. The President's Commission on Organized Crime recognized him as, quote, triple threat racketeer. And, quote, one of the group of men who are members of organized crime in places of position of affluence. Scotto, he always nice. I'm not in the mafia, well, of course. But Joe Valachi said he was, and Sammy Gravano said he was. Scotto grew up in Red Hook, which, did you see the movie On the Waterfront? That's Red Hook, where the laborers worked. His father worked for the city, and he was also a union organizer. Scotto quit school and everything else. At 16, he started working as a longshoreman on the Brooklyn waterfront. In 1957, guess who he married? Marion Anastasia. His father was Tough Tony Anastasia, and her uncle was Albert Anastasia. They ran the docks lock, stock, and barrel, no questions asked. And my understanding is the Scotto family today runs Fresco. It's a restaurant, Fresco by Scotto, on East 52nd Street, Manhattan. I don't know if it's still there. I'm going to check. Eventually, Scotto gets in on the union. Well, of course, look who his in-laws are. And he becomes an officer with the International Longshoremen's Association, the ILA, Local 1814 Red Hook, which has got to be the most corrupt union in America. And it's still fairly corrupt. Anyway, Anastasia used his position to control the Brooklyn waterfront. In 1957, Anastasia is murdered. Carlo Gambino takes over. He and Gambino got along really, really well, and Gambino kept promoting him and so forth. In fact, he made him a member of the mafia. Scotto rose to be the local recording secretary for his local, and then he became the organization director of his local now, 1814. He eventually would become an ILA, that's the union, general organizer. It's one of the three highest positions you can have. There's 100,000 members of that union. I think there's more than that now. On January 17, 1979, finally, Scotto was indicted on 33 federal counts of bribery, racketeering, and of taking a $300,000 bribes over 5 years from two dockside businessmen who employed the union workers. In other words, I'll give you a break and you bring my guys in if you pay me under the table. He also accepted a free swimming pool built by one of these guys, a vacation home, and he was accused of evading taxes. So he's convicted on all of these things in 1979. But listen to this. A U.S. District Judge, Charles E. Stewart Jr., Stewart Jr., we should know his name. He said he was, quote, extremely impressed by letters by former Mayor Robert Wagner. Remember him? And John Lindsay and all these labor leaders. And they all said, please give him some leniency, this made member of the mafia. He's a nice guy. This is incredible. On January 22, 1980, Stewart just throws out the mandatory sentence, 20 years. It doesn't exist. He gives Scotto 5 years in jail and a $75,000 fine. 1984, he serves just over 3 years, 3 years and 2 months, and he skips out of jail. That's it. Anyway, Gambino's successor was Paul Castellano. And Castellano was heard on a federal wiretap explaining to his driver, Tommy Bellotti, that about Scotto. He says, we respect him. It's our union. We're making him advance in our union. Go up, up, up the ladder. And what's going to happen? We're going to have a president. In other words, president of the union. Scotto was able to penetrate District Council 37, which is the country's biggest, richest municipal union. He took control of it for a while and handed it over to the Gambinos, to the Colombos, I'm sorry. So what happened was Castellano gets killed. He's murdered, as you know, outside of Sparks Steakhouse. And John Gotti takes over. And John Gotti just don't like this guy. And he replaces him with this other Red Hook mobster guy named Anthony Ciccone, Ciccone. Isn't that remarkable? You know, Ciccone, Scotto died a few years ago. He lived to be almost in his 90s.